All right, let's find out all about Socrates. Socrates was an ancient Greek philosopher. Many would say he's our first real philosopher, or the first one about whom we know a lot. He lived in Athens, and as you can see there, he lived from around 469 BC to 399 BC. I should say, life was very different, obviously, and in those days, there were no universities or schools as we would know them. Socrates also was a soldier, for example. He went and fought against the enemies of Athens, the city-state of Athens. And a memorable quote is, "I only know that I know nothing," which tells you a lot about how Socrates thought and argued. Socrates was famous for his way of philosophizing, of finding out about the world, we know now as the Socratic method. And that's a very simple thing, but when he came up with it, it was a radical and strange idea. Instead of saying, well, I'm an expert on love, for example, I know everything about love, here's my theory on love, what he would do is just begin to ask people, his friends and people that he met in the street, what do you think love is? And they would say, well, I think love is this. And then he would start to ask many, many questions. And always, people would find out that, well, they thought they understood something, a concept or an idea, but really their understanding wasn't that good. He didn't try to trick them, but he kept on asking questions, and often people got very angry at him because he did make them look stupid sometimes, especially if they were very proud or if they thought, oh, I understand this, I'm an expert. He would show them in front of other people, well, actually, your concept of what's beautiful or what's good or what's just or what is love, really, it's not logical. So he never said, here's the answer. He would just keep on exploring. And good teachers today, and all thinkers, still use this method, the Socratic method. Socrates himself didn't write any books. We know what he said because among his students, the most famous was Plato, who also, many would, of course, would say that Plato is the greatest philosopher of all. But a lot of Plato's books, they're called dialogues, and they're called the Socratic dialogues. And in them is written down what we believe Socrates actually said. So the first part of what Plato wrote was actually what his teacher and mentor, Socrates, said. And so these are the great Socratic dialogues. They include the Gorgias and the Symposium. By the way, the Symposium's all about love, and it's at a drinking party. And these men sit around and talk about what is the nature of true love. And many of the things that Socrates said seem paradoxical. They are paradoxes. When you first hear them or see them or read them, you might think, oh, well, that doesn't make sense. And here's a few for you. For example, no one desires evil, which is related to no one does wrong willingly or knowingly. And then virtue means good, doing good. Virtue is the same as knowledge, Socrates said. And he also said that virtue is enough for happiness. In other words, if you do the right thing, you will always be happy. Those are among the Socratic paradoxes, things that he and his friends argued and discussed about long ago. Now, as Socrates lived his life in and around Athens, made many friends and made enemies as well, because, he wasn't the kind of man to make powerful people look good. He destroyed, just by the force of his ideas, the very nature of authority. So he was just very critical and very honest, and he was put on trial in 399 BC for having a bad influence on young people. The leaders of Athens, which is a small city-state, said, well, you are corrupting young people. Young people now are just arguing like you. And they're just using arguments to destroy all our traditions. And you are also not respecting our traditional gods. And people found him guilty. And they made him drink hemlock, which is a poisonous liquid. Puts you to sleep forever. But instead of fighting this, he accepted it. And he said, if by doing this, I will, make Athens a more peaceful, less argumentative place, then I'm willing to die. And he said many other things. All this is written in Plato's great dialogue, which also is a Socratic dialogue called the Apology. And that's an amazing work that you should definitely try to read in Japanese. And here we see a famous painting, The Death of Socrates, by David, Jacques-Louis David. He was a neoclassical artist, and of course it's a beautiful work, but it's kind of funny to look at because, one, his friends look very sad because he's about to die. And this scene is described very well in Plato's dialogue, Apology, which is all about the nature of life and death and what happens to us after we die. But you see, Socrates is still talking. He has his finger raised in the air. That's Socrates with his finger raised in the air, and he's taking the poison. And his friend is giving him the poison. They have to do it. The city has made them do this, kill their friend. But he's doing it happily and even enthusiastically, still talking. To the very end, Socrates is still a teacher. My favorite quotation from Socrates is, "The unexamined life is not worth living." In plain English, that means you must question your life. You shouldn't just accept, here I am and here's what I'm going to do. You should think about your life every day, all the time, and that is a good life. So that's Socrates, our first great philosopher. And here's a few words and phrases that you can repeat after me and look up, because they're great words. Philosopher, philosophy, Socratic method, issues, dialogue, paradox, virtue, desire, critical, poisonous liquid, sacrifice, neoclassical artist, enthusiastic, unexamined, symposium, trial, and influence. And a few questions for a comprehension check. Basic questions. When and where did Socrates live? What was Socrates? What did he do? Why is he famous? How do we know what Socrates did and said? What did the leaders of Athens do to Socrates and why? And which Socratic dialogue describes the death of Socrates? I really would advise you to recommend that you try to read some of this philosophy. Even if you read one paragraph of Plato or Socrates, you won't be wasting your time.